This is Black Country Blokes chewing the fat.
Listen.
I've been hearing a lot lately about men don't talk, but in my experience, men do talk, just people aren't listening. So it's going to be me and a group of blokes discussing our struggles and victories through life. Warning, there may be some bad language, so apologies to all the mums, especially my own. Let's get going.
Listen.
I've been the artist, the Black Country Blokes, chewing the fat about everything it is mental health, disability, and life in general. Here with me, Kev Dillon, and my partner in crime, as always, Lee Cadman. Now, today we're joined by two doctors, two for the price of one, Dr. Becky and Dr. Panam. Yeah. And they're going to be coming on talking about the end of life plan. But as always, we're going to start with our gratitude list. Now, I've had a bit of a rubbish weekend, like with boxing. I had a couple of lads out boxing, and my lad Osman Mohammed was boxing, getting warmed up for his championships in 2 weeks. Was absolutely beating the lads on everyone's cards, and an accidental clash of heads, split his head open, hit the canvas. So he's got a 30-day ban, so he's out the championships. I was absolutely gutted. But then, I talked to the kid, and he's just, remarkable lad. He just goes, it happens, Kev, doesn't matter. I mean, what did you do? Went to the mosque, washed it, had a prayer, and ready to go again. I was devastated because it's a year's championships down the pan. But it's remarkable how positive and strong people are. And this is one of them kids. He's had so many setbacks in the game, but he just turns up and he trains. And, sometimes, as a teacher, I'm grateful for learning from the students, because I go on all this like positivity and higher, and I was ranting at my cake going, look, put all this bloody positivity out there, and nobody comes back. And she went, but positive comes in different ways. Sometimes you don't see it. Sometimes it is accidents happen, no matter how positive you are. It's not like God set about smiting Kev Dillon's boxer. He has better things to do than cutting Osman's head. It's just how we perceive it. So I'm grateful for having positive people in my life to remind me that I am positive and accidents do happen. What are you positive for? What are you grateful for?
For my work this week, I visited an old fella yesterday who needed his electric wheelchair repaired. I actually spoke to someone while I was there who is a nurse for end of life care. And obviously I mentioned that you two were coming on. Hopefully she's watching. Hopefully she's found us and she's watching. But when you just stop and have a really good conversation with someone and they get what you're talking about and they understand what you're saying. Yeah, so I'm grateful for that. Grateful for conversation. And the one we're about to have.
Yeah, two things. I think I always start my gratitude list with family and friends, and I think my husband's been away on work this week, so I think it's just made
You're grateful for that.
Yeah, sure.
No, if he's not watching.
Yeah, I know. But no, actually, it's made me the opposite. It's made me sort of realise how much he actually does and how supportive he is. So, very grateful for that. And then secondly, to be able to, I guess, work with such dedicated healthcare professionals who are trying to improve patient care. And I think, again, on the opposite side of that, we've got patients who actually allow us to have the meaningful conversations and give us an insight into their lives and actually trust us with their information. So very grateful for that as well.
I'm mostly grateful for my family and the fact that they listen to me moaning and stressing all the time about everything, mainly work, and they allow me to vent so that I can get rid of all those negative things and think about the more positive things and just sort of get on with the good stuff.
We need that in our lives. I mean, I often laugh with Lee, and we both say, both married, both love our partners more than God's green apples. But sometimes I find when you, in our case, especially mine, when we moan at our partners sometimes, and same with our Kate when she moans at me, we almost take it personal. It's like, I'm dead in the dumps. Is it me? Then your natural go-to, is it me? Is it something I've done? And sometimes you're just having a bad day. But because we love them so much, we want to make it better. We want to repair it. And sometimes just being there is the best medicine, isn't it?
Yeah, it's true.
It's not about fixing, it's just being there and just, if you want to hold hands, if you want to have a go at me, if you want whatever, I'm here for you, no matter what.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you don't even have to say anything. It's just having someone there. I think that just means a lot.
And I think sometimes what me and Lee have had over the last 4 years, we've known each other for 20 odd years. But what this has brought is like sometimes when I am having a wobble and I can't necessarily talk to my biological family, we can talk to each other, can't we?
Yeah.
Sometimes you can think, just even if it's bloody girl having a rant, or if it's I'm having a bit of a wobble, I've had a panic attack, and it's nice just having that person who you can rely on and bounce off, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. We do quite often there, don't we?
Yeah.
Pretty much daily. You phone me up. I'll start ignoring that call. No, it is good. Can I just add that if anyone's got any questions who's watching, well, we've got 2 experts in the room. Write them in. Don't laugh.
No pressure.
Yeah, we've got 2 experts and 2 doctors. but first of all, we'll get to you. What is your actual role? What's your full title?
So I'm a GP in Hales Owen. I'm clinical lead for cancer and end of life for Dudley Integrated Health and Care Trust, and I'm also a Macmillan GP.
Busy.
Yeah, busy. Yeah, very, very busy. So it's again sort of, I split my roles between cancer and end of life, and I think sometimes people think cancer and end of life sort of link in and they're the same thing, but actually they're 2 separate things. And I think it's just trying to make people more aware of that they're not always linked. They can be, but they're not always linked, and to try and sort of separate them and have those discussions. So again, we do a lot of clinical work and things in the background with sort of pathways for patients, and we do a lot of work sort of looking at services and trying to improve patient care. But a lot of my work also involves sort of talking to patients as well, and actually just supporting some of the, I guess, sort of services that are out there. So for example, for the end of life, a support like Dying Matters Week, which happens every week in May, and we do lots of events for that. So it's just trying to get as much information out there for patients, but also supporting other sort of healthcare professionals in their roles to try and discuss and understand the importance of the end of life and the cancer.
Because like with cancer, I mean, when you hear the C word, you do think it's the end, don't you? But we've moved so forward in the last 10 to 20 years, haven't we? It hasn't necessarily got to be a death sentence now, has it?
No, and I think it's just explaining that to patients. And I think, we often think it's just the end and there's nothing more. But actually, as you mentioned, I mean, over years, the treatments and the investigations and the diagnosis and diagnosing them at an earlier stage has really sort of improved. So I think it's then sort of taking a step back with patients and trying to explain that to them, because again, their anxieties and their fears sort of will take over, and initially it's quite difficult for patients to sort of absorb that information, but having that repeated conversations with them allows them to actually understand better what's available out there.
But when we're talking like the end of life as well, which we'll talk about in a minute, when you're bombarded with bad news, you're not thinking with a logical mind, are you? You're going on an anxious, frightened, emotional mind, aren't you? So I think it was Dr. Mann, he was saying, keep it short and sweet, because you can regurgitate pages, but very little is actually going in, is it?
Yeah, especially in that first conversation you have with patients when you get breaking the bad news. They will absorb very little, so a few words will stick into your head. So you actually really have to think about what you're saying to patients, because it really will impact them. And if you say the wrong thing, they'll get that stuck in their head, because that's all they'll hear. They'll hear all the negatives. They won't hear the positives or what's available and what's going to happen. They pick up on that. So again, it's having that repeated conversation with them afterwards. But yeah, initially keeping it short and sweet.
And Becky, what's your job role?
I'm a GP in Stourbridge, and I'm also I've got another couple of roles. Could be here all night talking about my job title. I'm an integrated care team lead, which basically means that I run a multidisciplinary meeting every week where we talk about patients and any problems that they might be having, and we have like mental health nurses, we have district nurses, Macmillan nurses, various different people all around the table, and we look at this person and say, what actually can we do to make their life better? And it's a lot of the time it's not medical things, it's all the other stuff that we try and help with, social problems and that sort of thing. And then also, as well as that, I'm a clinical lead for older adults. So that's why Poonam and I tend to work quite closely together and be at a lot of the same meetings and discussions, because obviously the one inevitable thing about getting old, if you live that long, is unfortunately at some point you're gonna die.
I think like we were saying then, like the social care and like mental health. I imagine like the cancers are almost easier to fix than the mental health, because everyone's mental health is different, isn't it? And you think it's not one tablet suits all, or one therapy suits all, or one hobby suits all. And sometimes when it's talking about feelings and emotions, it's hard to portray, get it over, and you can't just X-ray them going, blummin' this needs tweaking.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's some of, when we have those discussions about patients living with mental illness in our MDT meetings, it's there's some of the best discussions, because actually there's a lot that you can do, and there's a lot our staff can help with, and it's great, because actually in that meeting we have to think out of the box a little bit, outside the box, and come up with what's going to work for that person. And it's not stuff that's in textbooks necessarily, it's not stuff that they've done studies on, it's what do we just think, and what do we come up with.
Well, we say like after the pandemic, we started the big boxing classes. It was originally the Furlough Club, but open up each day, an hour a day, 10:30 to 11:30 for mixed, but they can come and train, do boxing training, and have a chat. And from April on, we're doing it 5 days a week for women as well. So it'll be 10:30 to 11:30 mixed, then 11:30 to 12:30 for free. For people to come down. So if you want to have a try at boxing, not sparring, not having combat, but learn the skills of boxing, fitness, and get out and have a chat. So if that's something your organisation, we'll work together.
I will pass that on, definitely, when I see my team tomorrow, actually.
And we said, like off air, like when we talk about end of life, it's going to happen to all of us, isn't it? The end of life. But sometimes when it's been with your partner, not making one a will, or when the end is coming near. I remember my granddad Mike was dying, and he was saying, with the house, and I was going, no, you'll be fine. Even though it's coming, you feel like by having the conversation, you're giving up. But it's not the case, is it? It's the writing's on the wall. Let's talk now. What is going to happen at the funeral? Is the money there? Have we got to raise money? What is happening to the house? What is going to... Because we were saying how many strong families split up because of the bloody cut glass, or who's having the forks, or who's having the dog, or I don't want the dog, what are you going to do with the dog? And it's a shame, but we feel our family is so unique and so strong, but this is why we need the discussions to avoid the fallout, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think what we can't control is what's going to cause our death, but what we can control is all the other things. So talking about what's going to happen, and what do you want in terms of your funeral and your will and all of that sort of thing. But I think it's not, end of life isn't really a topic that people want to go into, and it's often a topic that causes a lot of anxiety and fear. So it's commonly just avoided, and it's not something that people will talk about over a cup of coffee or over a cup of tea at times, and it's just brushed under the carpet until actually a loved one passes away, and then that's when they start to talk about it. But talking about it, I think initially can actually provide a lot of comfort and actually bring families closer together. So I think it's something that we try and encourage people to do a lot more, because we just don't talk about it enough.
So within your roles, when does that start being discussed? Do you wait for someone is ill and say terminal, and then you'll start in that process, or is it before that point?
Yeah, we try and start a lot before that point. So we sort of look at sort of their, what we call the comorbidity, so sort of what their lifestyle's like and what conditions that they do have. And when we can start to see that deterioration, we really want to pick it up at an early stage. It by the time sort of they're terminal, it's too late for us to be planning, because they'll say what their wishes are, and actually what we could have done is planned and did everything according to their wishes a lot earlier. So I think when they have sort of deteriorated, it's actually quite a late stage to be thinking about it. We really want to be picking up all of these patients a lot earlier, and actually just planning and making sure that they're having a comfortable end of life, and actually just picking up on their wishes and making sure we're actually adhering to their wishes.
And do you plan for things? Is it when you say planning? Because we're thinking about it, I suppose, from a will side of things, but you're thinking about from a care. So would it be like, would you like to leave this hospital and go home and die peacefully at home, or go to fantastic Mary Stevens hospitals and place that? Is that kind of where you fit in? And
yeah, absolutely. So it's picking up on their preferred places of care, preferred place of death, who they'd want around them. Is there anything specific? A lot of different cultures have different sort of values and do things a little bit differently. So it's picking them all up at an earlier stage. So yeah. If we know what the patient wants, so if they want to go home and die, and we would then start to put things in place so that happens for patients, and we know that we're following their wishes.
And like the do not resuscitate, and or I do want to donate my organs, or I don't want to donate my organs, or if when the quality of life is too bad, I don't want to be on the support machine, those kind of things. And how would they go about putting those things in place?
So normally we try and pick up these discussions at an earlier stage, and then now it's a national process. So now we're trying to have these positive conversations, encourage these conversations, and document it on what we call a respect form, which stands for recommended escalation and a summary of their treatment. I had to think about that then. And that sort of goes through it details, and I think it's not just helpful for sort of medical professionals, it's also helpful for patients to detail on there. And it's a brilliant document because it's got on there sections about what they fear the most, and sometimes this is going into hospital or someone not looking after my dog, and then the other side of it is their actual sort of wishes that they put on, and then the document sort of goes into what they would want in terms of their comfort. So do they want their comfort to be prioritized, or are they wanting more medical treatment? And it's having that conversation. So it's almost sort of that document, it sort of enables us to ensure that we're following their sort of wishes and making sure we've got everything in place. And then that again, the DNAR, so the do not resuscitate, is incorporated into that as well. And we try to have these conversations with their families present as well, and try and encourage that.
Well, I mean, Becky, that's really important, because I think about when I'm at that point and I'm deciding that I know I'd freak out about the dog not being looked after. If I hadn't already planned that.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be more my kids, to be quite honest. But swear about them. But you would, wouldn't you, if you haven't thought about that in the, you know, and we don't think about that. Like at my age now, I don't really. Yeah. I think I've thought about it a bit more as with Calla, because she takes a lot more care than my other two children, to be quite honest. So it's more of a thought in my mind. But I haven't done anything about that thought now, and really. To have something like that in place and discuss it with the family around you is really important, isn't it?
And actually having plans like that in place at the end of life is really important, because if someone's got something like that that's not sorted, often they'll be agitated at the end of life, and actually just sorting that small thing like who's going to look after the dog could actually make someone's end of life much better for them. They might need less medication at the end of life. They might just be generally more peaceful and and sort of serene and happy.
Yeah, I've had an experience. I was speaking off air because my daughter has an advanced healthcare plan, and there's a section in there where you talk about what you do in emergency situations like that, and they do not resuscitate. And I remember when we first filling that out a number of years ago now. She was a poorly child at the time, and I was just thinking, it absolutely terrified me filling it out, because I didn't want to think about that happening. But then a couple of years later, she was seriously ill in hospital, and I'm so glad we'd already filled that out, and I didn't need to be asked at the time, because that had, I think I knew at the time how much serious trouble she was in, but that had really brought it home if someone had walked up to me and said, "Well, if it comes to this, do you want us to resuscitate her or not?" It'd have been, I can't even imagine, to be honest. So it's really important to have these plans written down, isn't it? And
I think
everyone know what they're doing.
when it comes to it, and if you ask someone in that situation, it just becomes a completely emotionally driven discussion at that point. Whereas I think if you ask earlier, people can rationalize it.
Yeah.
They've got time to talk about it and talk it through with other people, you know, and all come to a you know, an agreement together as a family or as friends.
You know, you say that when we initially did it, it was an emotional reaction. Do everything you possibly can. And I probably at the time didn't understand why they was asking us that as well, not fully. But as a couple of years have gone on, I still want them to do everything they can. That hasn't changed. But my thinking now is totally different to what it was then. In terms, I actually think about it and why I want to do everything we can for her, not just a reaction of doing that.
Yeah. And I think when you said sort of it's a difficult sort of conversation that you wouldn't want at that time, I mean, it's difficult for families to go through that. But I think it's also, from our point of view, it's difficult for medical professionals because we don't want to be asking at that time because we know how much you're going through. And this is why it's so important to have that plan in place. So when it comes to situations like this, we don't have to sort of go through the details and you can just spend time with your loved ones.
I'm glad you said that, because this is why it's great having people on like yourselves, because when you're in the fight yourself, like him, he probably, not you particular, but you will say, well, how do you want to do it? And you, for God's sake, they'll take the frustration out on you. You're trying to do your job and he's just trying to survive.
Get through the day. Yeah.
You forget that person who's asking the question isn't doing it for kicks and laughs, and they're doing their job for the best for you and your child.
Well, I can imagine as well that that piece of paper has to be signed, and I just think, imagine you're in that situation where you're potentially going to lose your loved one, and this piece of paper, this person's in front of you saying, "Well, can you sign this just to say you don't want?" You know, it's. I understand it's got to be done, but it's very clinical and very like
but
you
they're
know,
also people. Aren't they?
That's it.
And you've got to take that. And I bet some days when you've had bad days in the office. And you've still got to take that home, haven't you, girls? And that's, do you guys, that like when you have had a bad day, do they offer you therapy, and is there organisations where you two can talk and have help?
There are, I mean, we have got things like can't think what practitioner support, where we can go for sort of mental health support, and I think like the BMA have got a helpline that you can ring and that sort of thing. And I think during the pandemic there's a lot of other stuff cropped up actually, because I think people finally realised that actually taking everybody else's burdens on all day becomes quite a burden to you. So there's a website that we can all access in the Black Country called The Hub, and we can all look on there, and there's loads of stuff that you've got access to.
Yeah, I think you're right, Becky. I think there's a lot more now than there used to be. And I think especially, like you said, after the pandemic is when a lot of people struggled. So I think after that, there's been a lot more sort of support services out there for healthcare professionals.
Because we need people to look after you guys, because you're looking after everyone. And I imagine, like with everything, some patients are easier to look after because they're more friendly, they're more appreciated. But even the not very nice ones still need to be looked after, don't they?
Yeah.
And that's, they too are people, like you are people. And I think sometimes that person who could be being horrible to you on any given Tuesday might be a lovely chap.
Yeah.
It might be horrible, it might just be one of them horrible people, but it might be a lovely chap, but he's so tired and in pain and frustrated and frightened, he's got to take it out on someone. So you might not always see the best of that person, had you?
Yeah, it's true.
We've had a question coming, actually. I'll just bring it up. So they ask, can someone discuss with the GP before end of life planning or terminal illness, e.g. I have severe asthma and I'm reasonably well at the moment, but I know it can be totally fatal, very serious all of a sudden. So would they go to the GP and discuss that at this point? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's we have so many patients, and normally if they've got lots of health conditions and things, that's when they start to have these discussions. But we've also, you know, I've had patients who haven't got many but have got maybe a severe one or even a less severe one who want to just discuss their care plan, and that's absolutely fine to be able to do that. I think we try and make sure that people know it's not just sort of for those that are coming towards the end of life. It can be for anyone who wants to discuss.
And that's what you presume, isn't it? You think, well, someone who's terminal and has only got been told they've only got so long, you think, oh, well, they put that in place, you know. It is the same as doing a will, isn't it? It's the same kind of thing. You're going, actually, I'm putting this in place so everyone knows before that point. I'm fine now, but everyone knows before that point, and there's no questions or debates about it. It's done.
No, sorry.
No, I was just going to say the other thing is that people, you know, when we do discuss it, we write it down in the care plans, and they can change over time. So, you know, it's not that it's fixed and that's exactly how it has to be. You know, over time things change. So if you feel differently sort of a couple of years down the line, or so, you can change, and we can have that rediscussion about sort of their health at that time and make a different plan.
Can any GP, so if I was to go to my GP now, any GP will stop it, or will they point us in your direction to do that, to do the plan?
I would hope that any GP
Would sit
be
down and
happy
do
to
it.
sit down and have that
Okay.
discussion with you. And you know, I think we have much more training now, don't we, about end of life discussions and, you know, breaking bad news and things. I think, you know, we are lucky that we have a lot more communication skills training and things now.
I think it is good, because how many times you've gone to someone's funeral and you go, Jeff would have absolutely hated it. You know what I mean? And you think he knows, and you leave there thinking, oh. But if you can have that conversation, you think, well, he was more of a religious person, or she wanted more music, or you know what I mean? And I think, because the funeral itself is just a goodbye, isn't it? I think it's painful. It's always painful when you lose someone, but it's painful up to the funeral. And you cry at the funeral, then you go to the wake and you have a laugh. Yeah, and you think you're having a good laugh about the sad times, the funny times, and the wake can actually be a good laugh, can't it? And then it's that kind of goodbye. And then obviously the next day, whatever, you see a crisp packet or whatever, and your heart breaks again, because that's grief, isn't it?
Yeah.
I heard a lovely saying once: grief is the price we pay for loving someone, but it's the price we pay over again. And it is that pain is just, you loved them so much, but at least you got to love them. And I think if we can honour their wishes in how they either want to be treated, or how they want to be mourned, or what goes to it, it's what we should do for them, isn't it? And if they want to give it to the cat, it's theirs. It's up to that human being, isn't it?
Definitely.
And respect their wishes.
Definitely.
So once that's filled out, and obviously it does come towards the end of life, if that person was to or if that person's family wanted to change anything within that, would they be allowed to do that? Or, you know, is there circumstances where the doctors would feel like it was better to go another route and change anything in there, or is it kind of that set in stone and that's what we follow?
So I think we try to, so it depends. So this is why we try and get family involvement when we do sort of the planning side of things. But I think it would depend, because ideally, if that was what the patient had written, then we would want to follow that as much, because again, if anything changes, we're not sure sort of what's the circumstances around that in terms of what family and things. So we would always follow it or act in the best interests of the patient.
And I think, you know, life throws curveballs sometimes. So you do make these plans, and you know, I've had patients where, you know, they absolutely desperately wanted to stay at home, but actually it's just not been possible to do that for whatever reason. You know, often in terms of a safety reason, that we just cannot get the amount of care that person needs to be at home. And, you know, if that happens, that's not a decision that we would take lightly. We would, you know, literally sit round a table and have everyone who's involved in that person's care have a chat about it and work out, you know, if we can't do exactly what that person wanted, what's the closest next thing that we can get, you know, and just check in at every stage that the family are okay with that and are happy. Because actually, if you get, you know, the reason I love doing end of life care with patients is, if you do it right, it's that last thing that you do, and that can be the difference between that family having a good passage through their grief or not. You know, it really is that important.
And sometimes, like she said, I want to stay at home, and then the person just your loved one, your children, your partner, just can't look after you, and then that there isn't enough home help, or you keep having tumbles, or I can't lift
Well, you can't get the equipment physically in the house, or yeah.
And you see it with your blinkers on, don't you? Because you figure, well, I want to die in this house. This is my house, all my happy memories. And then all of a sudden, it's not a happy place anymore because you're seeing your partner's falling apart, or your children's falling apart. So that's when you can review your plan.
Yeah.
And what's it called again? Respect form.
Yeah, it's almost like an adjunct to sort of an advanced care plan, but the respect form is one that sort of it's got all the information in a short, succinct way. So for healthcare professionals, so again, because it may not just be the GP, so you'll have out of hours doctors and other healthcare professionals that might need to come in to review the patient. So that's sort of more of a medical document, but then takes into account the patient's wishes. So it's provided in a succinct way. But we also do have the advanced care planning document, which goes into a bit more depth around what patients' wishes are and what their fears are and all the little bits that patients want. And for example, some patients will say, oh, at my funeral I want those red shoes, or I want the red lipstick, and they're the sorts of things that we would sort of discuss and put in their care plans.
And is that care? So the advanced care plan, well, daughter, we have a physical copy that we take around. Is that the same principle with that? So wherever you go, anyone can look at it. Anyone you want can look at it. It's not anyone you can look at it.
But we can't go like download this. We have to go and sit with a professional to go through it.
Yes, it has to be, because it has to be signed by a medical professional. So
it is a legal document. It's not just I can just whip one up.
So the respect form isn't classed as a legal document, but it is a form that has to be signed by what we call the senior responsible clinician. So GPs or whoever's in charge. If it's in a hospital, it'll be a hospital doctor that'll be able to sign that.
It's funny, like being a dad. You like to think, like, if I died, my wife would look after my daughter, or she dies, but even like talking about it, like, because you don't like thinking about it, blood my neck, if one of us died, or like if one of us had cancer or whatever, you got your Bible. But there's that, well, how about if we both went, then it looks after your daughter, and them kind of things. And you try not to think about it in the day-to-day life, do you? If you can blood my neck, don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But how about if you did? So it is worth thinking about who would look after my baby, who would look after my little girl, who would, and it's sometimes we need to have uncomfortable conversations, because what's more uncomfortable, this like bit of an awkward feeling now, or what would happen? So we need the conversations, don't we?
I would like, in my lifetime, hopefully, that people don't think that they're awkward conversations anymore. We've, if you look at the Victorian era, they were really comfortable with death. Death was just what happened. Obviously people died a lot younger. So people were just seeing death all the time. Families were really involved in what happened after death. They laid their own relatives out. They had people in the house after they died, and people came round, and it was just normal. And I think now medicine has kind of basically advanced so much that we almost view death as a failure now. Even if someone's 100, we still view that as a failure somehow, that couldn't they have just got to 101, or couldn't they have just got to another 6 months? And it's I think we need to just accept that it is part of life, and it does happen.
But I think because we're living longer as well, that is kind of hard, the problem, because people were more used to having death around them from an earlier age. You saw more people dying, your friends, family, whereas now we're living longer. So it seems further away, doesn't it?
But it's funny, like how we touch wood getting the better of cancer now with the research. But then when I was growing up, you wouldn't hear about many people taking their own lives. It was happening behind closed doors. Whereas suicide has touched virtually everyone at the minute. I mean, like anxiety, depression has. If you didn't believe in mental health before the lockdown, we've all had a taste of it through the lockdown, with the loneliness, the anxiety, and everything else coming at you. But then more and more people, and I don't know if it's because what we do here, but more and more people say suicide has ended their life at some stage. Have you, especially you, Becky, like working with it, have you seen more creeping in?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a GP for 11 years, like fully qualified, and I've definitely seen it more often, and I think in younger people as well. That I think that's a really frightening thing, is that it is much younger people, and the methods as well have kind of changed.
I bet you.
Yeah, same, and I would agree, because I, as a GP, you encounter mental health all the time with patients. But yeah, they are a lot younger now, and it's trying to get that support in place for those patients at an earlier stage, sort of. And previously, I think we'd always think, later on as they get older, and we normally talk about the adult side of things, but now we're looking at more sort of in younger ages and in children, and it's actually trying to recognize that and trying to put the support in place for those children.
What did you say? When it is children, I mean, it's never any good anyway, but when it's children and the devastation we've had Papyrus on, we've had Ripple on, and Alice from Ripple, her brother completed suicide, and she put it better than I probably ever have, because I've had people in my life take their lives, and it said suicide's different to any other bereavement, because when your dad dies of cancer, you can hate cancer, or he gets run over by a car, you hate that drive, but when that person you love takes their own life, who do you hate? And you blame them, going, why haven't you talked to me yourself, sod, and we could have, and then you're mourning, but you're almost resentful, and it's a weird form of mourning. And when she said it to me, and I've said this on many shows, I've talked to people, and it's very identifiable. You can identify with you thinking, I'm sad, but I'm so frustrated. And it's weird emotion. When you lose someone, and my dad always says this, no matter how good of a son or husband or whoever you are, you always feel a bit guilty when someone dies, because I could have seen him a little bit more. Did I tell him I loved them enough? Or I didn't take him to the airport, or whatever it is. And it leaves us that kind of... Do you see that in your practice? The guilt after someone's passed with people. Is it more common than you think? And
yeah, I mean, I think most people I speak to who are bereaved will have some sort of guilt about something, and like you say, it's not always the big things. Sometimes it's the little thing that they didn't do. And my dad died last year, and as a doctor, I was questioning myself. I was thinking, well, he was ill a couple of days before I went into hospital. Should I have known? Should I have done something differently? And the honest answer is no, because he had endocarditis, which is incredibly rare. You don't see it very often. There's no way I could have known from having cold symptoms, but you have to go I think you have to go through that process of working through that. And I do see it with most bereaved people. I don't know about you.
Yeah, no, I do as well. And I think we often talk about the different stages of grief, and and it's that all over again, and trying to work through, and it's very easy to blame yourself for things, and think, oh yeah, could I have done things differently? But actually, when you go back and actually sort of work through things, you've probably done everything you can. You've probably done the best you can.
What are the stages of grief?
So the stages of grief, there's 5 stages. They normally go through. I'm going to try and see if I can remember this now. Just be testing me.
We're going to test you. I'll bring it up now as well.
You probably need to be honest. So I think it goes from anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. Yeah. So they're the ones that it goes sort of round, and some people spend different in each stage, so different amounts of times in each stage. Some people may not have go through all the stages, but we see people go through it in different ways. We always talk about that, and that's when I often use that when I'm talking to patients about when they've had bereavement or we're going through the grief, and you often get delayed grief reactions as well. So some people actually, when someone's bereaved and they're absolutely fine to start off with, but it hits them a little bit later on. So it's then having that discussion and trying to make them recognise that actually the feelings that they have are pretty normal because they're going through that grief process.
We've had another question come in. I'll just bring it up. From Steve. How you doing, Steve? Steve Ansel. Not sure if you've covered this, but just wondering if the doctors have any access to help should they need it. Could only imagine it would be hard at times. Well, actually, we have covered it. If you'd have listened, Steve. I'm not going to tell you again. No, there is the Black Country hub that you can use. I'll just add to that question. Is there anything you two do personally that helps you at the end of the day to kind of forget about? Well, not forget, to deal with what's gone on through your day.
I don't know. So my husband's medical surgical also, because he's a doctor as well. I find it very helpful just to talk through some things, because I guess he understands as well. Sometimes when I talk to my family, they understand, but to a certain extent. So it's nice to have someone. And I often just think speaking about the things and what's happened through your day, and just getting some reassurance that you've done the right thing, that you've done all you can to help that patient is really just helpful for me. I don't tend to do much sort of writing down things, and because I know a lot of people do write down things and try and sort of deal with it that way. But I think even just speaking about things, and I think once I've sort of talked about it, almost ranted about things, it's a better way for me to deal with.
I find that with disability and looking after my daughter, that speaking to someone who's lived that experience, it might not be exactly the same what's going on, but someone who understands what you're saying, who's been through something similar, is a real big help. Have you got any?
Yeah, I mean, my husband's not a doctor. He don't work in medicine at all. He works in quality in automotive industry. So sometimes I'll rant at him, and he'll be like, "This enough. We've heard enough of this. You need to move on." So that's often good, actually, because it stops you from dwelling on everything. And sometimes me and my mum drive him crackers because she works in health as well. So we've got a lot in common, and we both understand it. She's, and she gets it. So I think you have to have a balance of both things, don't you? And you need different things at different times, I think.
Well, Lee, come on for great saying. It's been like one of the backbones of podcast. You've got to find your medicine, haven't you?
Yeah.
Whether it's exercise, walking, ranting, drinking, whatever it is, you find what keeps you afloat in the storm.
Definitely.
And sometimes you go, well, what you should do, but what works for you won't necessarily work for me. So find what brings you peace and roll with that, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'm reading messages. We're going down there. We've just been bombarded. So apologies. Excuse me a second.
No, I heard someone say recently, and they were talking about the pandemic. We're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat.
Yeah.
Because actually, the pandemic was different for everybody, wasn't it? It was the same, but your experience and the way you played it was differently. And
I think that it's so true. Like me and Lee, Lee rather enjoyed because he was at home. They were all in quarantine, but he got to spend time with his girls and his lad. You know what I mean? So, whereas other people I've talked to hated it, and I had bouts of hating it and loving it because, you know what I mean? I hope to God when my little girl grows up and someone goes, "Oh, you were a Corona baby, weren't you?" She goes, "Oh, that was great. Me and my daddy were playing all the time." You know what I mean? And I hope that's the memory she has from it. But other people had a dreadful time. So, yeah, same storm, different boat.
Yeah. I had a job where I was travelling up and down the country, here, there and everywhere, rarely at home for more than a few hours. And then I was off out again. And so for me, it slowed me right down. And that was it, because once my daughter came along, I thought, right, I've got to, well, when any of my children, I've got 3 children, when they all came along, I thought, oh, right, you've got to be the breadwinner now. You've got to earn more, because my wife couldn't work because she was looking after kids. But that especially happened when my little one come along and had her disabilities. So, well, you've got to be out there more, earning more, because you're going to lose that wage, and you want to. And there's more expense if you're looking after someone with disability. and I panicked and I worked harder, longer, more hours, and the pandemic come along and it stopped it all. It's right, you're at home now, and I absolutely love being at home, looking after her. But it also made me realise that actually you don't need that much money. You don't. If you're sacrificing time with your family for money, there's always going to be an element to that, because we've all got to live in a house and eat. But make sure it doesn't go to the extreme where you're not seeing them and you're not part of their lives, because it's useless. Especially like my daughter, there's a good chance we'll outlive her. So do I want to get to that point and regret not spending as much time as possible there?
Puts things into perspective.
It definitely does. Definitely did, yeah.
Life's got a great way of doing that, hasn't he? Humbling you or making you think, bloody hell, why am I sweating this?
So we've got another, Steve's asked another question. I'll just bring it up again. So is there a normal time that grief can take? I lost my older brother a long time ago, but still affects me from time to time. Sometimes still feels like it's just happened.
And this is where it goes back to what I was saying, is that people go through it differently. Yeah. So it can last up to however long it lasts to get that acceptance, and people will go through the different stages. So there's never a point where we will say, oh, by this time you will have gone through it and you'll feel better, because everyone's different and everyone will work through it in different ways.
I know Steve, brother, who's a good friend of mine, and what I found myself is when it initially happened, because it was 21, now nearly 39, so it's a long time ago now. But to begin with, it was a lot of thinking about the bad that he passed, which it's horrible that he has. But as time went on, it was more thinking about the fun we had, because we're friends from an early age up until 21, and we got up to some mischief. And I'll remember that more now than actual the bad of him passing away and the circumstances it was under.
But someone said about with grief and with trauma, sometimes you put like a cork in it, and the cork can come off at any time.
Definitely.
Sometimes it's instantaneous, isn't it? And then sometimes, and you look at them and go, how on earth are you still going? You look at people and you go, how hasn't it affected you? And then all of a sudden you just see them 10 years, 20 years, and it hits them. What has happened? The realisation.
Seen that with patients loads, actually. And sometimes with grief, it's obviously you experience the grief of the death that happens there and then, but sometimes I'll see people who lose another member of their family or a friend, and it just rakes up all of the past as well. So it doesn't become grief about one person, then it's almost double grief. And also you see clusters where people lose 2 or 3 people in a short succession of time or whatever, and they just can't process the grief from one person before they get to the next death, and then it just it just snowballs.
And once again, you've got to know yourself, and sometimes we don't know how we're going to be, do we?
No.
And there's not a way to be. So I think it's not. You shouldn't fit into a box of why this is how you should behave. It's just go through the emotions yourself.
But I do think people have this notion that there is a way you should be, and I think people, like when my dad died, my husband said to me, "You've barely cried," and I was like, "No, you've barely seen me cry. I do my crying upstairs when you're asleep, or in the car at the traffic lights when a song comes on that reminds me of Dad. I do it my own way, and I think he thinks because I cry at I can cry at Coronation Street, I should automatically have that same reaction to Dad's death, and it's different and it hits you in a different way. But I think there is that notion that you're supposed to do things in a certain way.
I'm a bit like that. I'm a titty babby. I'll cry at anything, but when other things, and I'm thinking, well, why haven't you cried at this? And my wife said, well, why? But it's different emotions, and something will just catch your breath, and then other stuff. When you're thinking, am I in shock? Is it? Because I know I'm hurting, and I know my life will never be the same, but I haven't reacted how I thought I was going to react at this time.
Totally get that.
But we're complicated. But as you say, the next time something happens, and then you just you're somewhere and you just break. And it wasn't the right time, but it wasn't the wrong time. It was just a time that your body was ready to grieve.
And I think we need to sort of be really open about that, don't we? That there isn't a right and a wrong time to experience emotions. They come when they come, and you know, you just got to deal with it at that time. And I think, you know, talk about it more and be honest about it, you know,
And support each other.
yeah.
I think
I think that goes to the life care plan as well, doesn't it? Because that's going to be an emotional time, but don't not do it because it's going to be emotional. You know, still sit down and do it and kind of accept. Okay, it's going to be emotional. Let's sit down. Let's do it. And I don't know whether you'd advise it, but once you've actually written it down, give it a week or two and then revisit it, because you are looking at things through an emotional lens, because the kind of questions that are asked.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's being able to make sure that you're aware that you can go back to things and look at it in 2 weeks' time or so, and make sure you're happy with what's on there and whether things have changed and how you're feeling at that point as well, because again, things will change.
And if, like you say, you split up with your partner and stuff like that, and revisit things like that, or if you've had a fallout with your siblings, and just because you've put it down once, you can go back and say, well, I'm not with her or him, or this has changed. Can I revisit it?
Yeah.
Or my dog has now unfortunately passed away, so Patch hasn't got to be looked after now. You know what I mean? It's,
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
and it's simple things, because it's amazing what we worry about, isn't it? And I've known people, you know, at Fafa, they worry about everything. You know, it looks like it's going to rain. Oh, we've got to get the washing, and then something amazingly bad happens, and they're as cold as a cucumber. But that same person who's cold as a cucumber, have you walked the dog? Yeah, I've walked the dog. Are you sure you've walked it? I've walked the bloody dog. And it's funny what can tip people over the edge. They're there, stood on the brink of absolute catastrophe. But if that dog's not walked 3 times a day, they will lose their head.
You just described me.
But you've got to care for that person. If the dog has to be walked 3 times a day, have it in place. That dog is being walked 3 times a bloody day, because that can make the biggest difference at a crucial time, can't it?
It can, and honestly, I've seen people at end of life get really agitated, and it's so hard sometimes to work out why they're agitated, and it's not usually anything medical. It's usually something that's going on in their mind or their head that's just stressing them out. And if you can find it and know, and you know, you can sort it.
But that is, sometimes I'm dying, the cancer's got me, but I should have control over walking Patch.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's that when I've lost control of absolutely everything, it's the last bit I have. Make sure he or she's all right.
Yeah.
So respect that in someone, and they might not just be an awkward old git.
Exactly.
It could really make all the difference. So be a bit patient, bear with them, and respect their wishes. We'll go off and ask, is there anything first you want to say about your organisation, or anything that you need to get out there, or anything in general?
I would say just talk to your family, you know, and if there's something that you think's important that they need to know about end of life for you, you know, I mean, just tell them. You know, my mum's made it quite abundantly clear she wants everyone to wear yellow, she wants a horse and cart, and she'd like us all to walk out of the crematorium to Copacabana by Barry Manilow. So, you know, if you happen to see that going down the road, you know. But, you know, seriously, these conversations you need to have.
Yeah, and I would say people just need to talk about it more, because it is an uncomfortable topic. But once you've talked about it once, it gets easier to talk about. Definitely. You're able to plan things. You're able to make your wishes heard. And I think it's just recognising. I think sometimes people feel that if they talk about it, they become a bit weaker, or they're being a burden on their families and friends. But I think actually, just actually having that conversation is is helpful for not just sort of patients but for families as well. So if anything, talk about it, and I think it just plants the seed as well to start thinking about it at an earlier stage. So yeah, the earlier planning you can do and have those discussions with family, the better it is.
Just in case anyone's wondering, I want a solid gold statue of myself. Just sprinkle my ashes up the club and I'm happy.
And
We'll put them in a punch bag for you if you like.
I was just going to say, we've got a new start. I want to call it a club, but it's not really a club. A new organisation, that's the word I'm looking for, started recently. I've been involved in, called Coughing Club. I just want to plug them because they're trying to break down barriers about death and about talking about death and, just trying to make it normal part of life. And, they've got a Facebook page basically, and it's, if you search for Margaret's Memory Coughing Club, Margaret was the mum of the person who set it up. You'll find it, and there's loads of really interesting information there, and it's light-hearted. It's a serious topic, but it's done light-heartedly and with a smile.
What's it called again?
It's called In Margaret's Memory Coughing Club.
Margaret's
CIC. Yeah.
So, girls, and it's the awkward bit, but we always like to finish on a quote. Have you got any quotes or sayings that have helped you get through life?
Do you know what? I was just about to finish on this because I came across one the other day and I thought, that's really, it just makes you think about things differently. So it says, at the end of life, what really matters is not what we bought, but what we built, not what we got, but what we shared, not our competence, but our character, and not our success, but our significance. Live a life that matters. And I think it's just bringing together actually to make sure that you're talking about what matters to you in life more, so that you're able to achieve everything that you've wanted to achieve in life.
Have you listened before, or has Kev warned you about that quote?
No, Kev, you didn't warn me.
No.
You warned me about
I'm really
crying.
because Kev drops most people in it, and everyone just says, "Oh God."
No, I didn't. It was I was looking at something. I can't remember what I was looking at. And I was doing some research because, again, sort of like the Coughing Club, we do sort of Dying Matters Week, we do death cafes and things like that. So I was just pulling some of the information because that's obviously coming up in the next couple of months. So I was just looking at things, and it just came across. And there's loads of quotes out there, but I just thought it's just what matters to you in life and your quality of life, and actually talking about things just highlights that really.
Becky?
I can't think of anything deep and meaningful and
that was a hard act to follow, to be fair.
Yeah. So no, not really. No.
That was lovely, and because I love my quotes, love my sayings, and as you say, it's my mum always said, because on the deathbed she won't think about the telly or the settee, it'll be the times you spend with those who matter. And that's what life is, isn't it? It's the memories that we take with us and we leave behind. So, guys, thank you ever so much for coming on. Guys, thank you for listening. So I want you all to take care of yourselves and each other. Ta-ra a bit.
Listen.
And that's a wrap for another show. But if there are any comments or messages that you would like us to read out for our next podcast, please be in touch. There are also lots of different organisations at the bottom of this page, and hopefully they can help you or someone you care about. Please share this to spread the word. Until we talk next time, ta-ra a bit.